Okay, well, happy Sabbath. For those that weren't here on Wednesday, go ahead, Jackie. Hi, Jackie.
Yes, good to see you and to be with you all. I was with my family at Brian. It was a blessing.
Oh, good.
So, but I missed the meeting. I wanted to be with you and yeah. So that was where I was.
Well, for those that weren't here on Wednesday, we're going to kind of repeat it. It might not be exactly the same because we might be a little bit more added to it as we go along, more discussion, see how it goes. But um, just to introduce it, we're going through, we're going to use from multiple presentations and that have been done by Elder Tess and Elder Parmenter, and take from that and put pieces together. And I do have some of them written on the board, so you'll see them. And some I might be able to remember, and some I might not. But the ones that I do remember, I wrote on the board for us. And I think it's a good idea to go back and, if you can, I mean, if for any reason you're not solid on some of the points of this message, the reviews are invaluable, if that's the right way to say that. And what I'm going to share is just only put together from things that they have said. And I was thinking about it earlier, how this might just be an overview, but going back would really be important to get each point as it was established and developed. And I say that because I was thinking about math. We've used the comparison before. You don't go from your addition and subtraction and multiplication and division and jump on into calculus. There are concepts along the way that are introduced to help you to get more advanced, if that makes sense. So much of it will be review, I think. But the presentations that a lot of this was pulled from is written on the board, and I'll note them as we go along. Um, and I would recommend especially uh, Elder Parminder in Tahiti in May of 2019. And I've gone through number 3, 4, and 5 as a review, but I intend to go through all of them. But I initially set out to find the one that he talked specifically about Islam. So he went from a sequence of Brazil, February or March or sometime when they did the School of the Prophets there. And that's where what first began to open up with the understanding of Josiah Litch's writings, that Uriah Smith, if anybody remembers the title of the presentation, Uriah Smith was right. Um, and that was in Brazil in 2019 when that first started to open up. Then it was taught again in Tahiti. And then I think it's 2021 in Germany. I might have the date wrong, but if you typed into your YouTube search, Uriah Smith was right, and put Parminder's name, you will find Uriah Smith was right. And I'm pretty sure it's in Germany of 2021 maybe. But that was when it was more condensed version of it. But if does anybody, are you familiar with Uriah Smith was right? Anybody want to speak up real quick before we get started? You're familiar with Uriah Smith was right and what he taught?
I'm somewhat familiar with it. Um, Elder Parminder mentioned that because in the time of Uriah Smith, which I think he copied from Josiah Litch,
Yes,
and they agreed. So, and basically, the king of the north was Turkey, and king of the south was Egypt. And the hymn that's mentioned is France.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. And I've been listening today again, going back to, because it was number 4 that I focused on at first, but been listening to number 3, which is the loud cry in 1840. I think loud cry in 1840. I can't
Number
remember
three from where?
say that what?
Number three from where?
from May of 2019. May of 2019. Sorry. Was I think it's called A Loud Cry in 1840, something like that. But it's number three, and the fourth one is Islam and the Midnight Cry. And then the fifth one is the transition from Rome, the transition of Rome from pagan to papal. And that's also very helpful because when you go back into that history, you understand you're starting to look again. He only briefly touches on, but the four trumpets that took down pagan Rome and then the transition to papal Rome. And that's where we pick up here because that 1260 is in Revelation 9 with the first and second woes. And we knew for a very long time on the charts, the 1843 chart and the two charts, that Islam was placed there. So Josiah Litch was tracing the actual history, the literal history, as Fell just said. And when you go back to those studies by Elder Parmenter, he makes a statement that you have two Islamic factions, I think that's the word he used, two Islamic powers that are fighting. And so we'll kind of pick up there because I don't remember how much we touched on that the other day, but a lot of it's going to be from memory. So if anybody else remembers some of this, feel free to jump in. And I think I turned it on to record. Yeah, I did. Didn't I turn it on to record? Yeah. Okay. So this is the story over here that I have, if you can see that, and I'll read through it so that if you can't read it, and then I'll take a picture because I did make a few changes or additions to the board. But I went through the last three Vespers classes, which War with the Neocons. Can't remember the next title, but the one after that is Foreign Policy. It's a critique of the left wing. So War of the Neocons, and then the critique of the left wing, and then foreign policy. So, and then Uriah Smith was right. I've got him up here. Brazil 2019. I think it was February, March, somewhere in there. And then Tahiti, May of 2019, and Germany 2021. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it's 2021, but you might want to check that. But you can find it just by doing it in a YouTube search. But this is just right here what Fell just told us with Daniel 11:40, that the king of the south is Egypt, which was a Islamic power. The king of the north was Turkey, was an Islamic power, and then the him was France. And so you had, if anybody remembers, back when we did some of these studies, we went through the Napoleon and his Egyptian expedition, and that's in that 1798 history. I think it was a 2-year period, and he goes to Egypt. Does anybody remember why he goes to Egypt?
Was it the waterway?
Yes.
I just can't remember the name.
Bigger, but yes, you're right. I'm trying to narrow down to where you're at, but yes. But do you remember why?
No, I can't.
Okay.
It has to do with India, wasn't it?
Say that again.
Passage. That's right, Fell. Passage to India.
Yes. He's in the battle with England. It's France and England, and England has trade with India, and he wants to go in and establish trade through the waterway. Yes. What's that waterway? Why am I not? I don't want to get my canals mixed up. So somebody shouted out.
The Suez
Canal. Okay. And it's not yet built, but there is some portion of it established, I think, at the time. But he wants to establish trade, whereas England was going all the way down Africa, and from what I understand, going around the Horn of Africa was very dangerous, and then to get into England. So he wanted to be able to cut through that path and get to and establish trade with India that would hurt England economically. So he goes down and he winds up in a fight with you have two Islamic powers. Remember, you still got the Ottoman Empire, even though it has shrunk, you've got the Ottoman Empire there, and you have Turkey, you have the Sultan in Turkey, and then the Pasha of Egypt. I don't remember the names, so if anybody remembers the names, great, shout them out or put them in the chat. But Napoleon fights with Egypt and loses, if I remember right. And then he tries to go up and get into Syria, and he gets beat by the Sultan as well. So you have two Islamic powers that are fighting, and this involves France. So that was the established, or that's what was taught or brought out through Josiah Litch, which brought you eventually to the date August 11th, 1840, where you see Islam restrained. So up here I have that starting at 1831. We just described 1798-ish, probably a couple of years into that. And then after that, if somebody might remember, there were several other things that were going on along that line, leading to 1831. Because the Ottoman Empire was shrinking, there were those that were fighting for their independence. So you have the Greek War of Independence that starts, I don't remember the date it starts, like 1827 or 8, somewhere in there. And then I think it's finished in 1831 or 32, I think. And so Greek becomes established. So in these battles that are taking place, the Sultan in Turkey, the King of the North, asks the King of the South, Egypt, to come up and help him. And he's a vassal of King of the North. He's a vassal put in place in Egypt, and he asked him to come up with him and help him fight some of these wars. And I don't remember the specific wars. We can later maybe go through some of those details on some of the old studies we did. And he promises him Coal Syria in exchange for his help. So the Pasha does his part of the bargain, but Turkey doesn't give him Coal Syria. And that's what sparks this 10-year Syrian war in this history during the Millerite history. And there were 2 years basically of fighting, and then a 6-year break, and then 2 years here at the end. So you had 1831 to 1833, then you had 1839 to 1841, and right here in 1840 is where you have, it's August 11th, and you have the loud cry and the first angel empowered, which also, it's the right way to say that. Miller was already teaching a day equals a year in Bible prophecy, right? Or understood it, and this confirmed Miller's day equals a year. And so it was a confirmation and empowering the message. So that was the 10 years in Syria. And what Elder Parmenter also then talked about was the 10-year Syrian war. And this was back, remember, 2019, it was pre-Panium where he's talking about this. And later in 2021, I'm pretty sure that's 2021, he's talking about it. But at this time, we knew that Arab Spring triggered off the Syrian civil war. And then there was battles for Islamic powers battling in the Middle East for control. And we'll go through a little bit more of those details on the other board. I just wanted to line up these two lines, and I don't remember if we did that. We might have done that on Wednesday, where we lined them up. So you have the 2 years here. The 2 years here, this is marking when ISIS is formed. So you had prior to that, let's see, because Bin Laden, I don't remember what year Bin Laden was killed. But then you have this with Arab Spring coming in and is the Islamic State pushing in through Syria, then it became the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria.
Was it May of 2011? Wasn't it May under Obama's presidency that Bin Laden was killed? The SEALs went in.
It was under Obama, yeah. I don't remember the year. I don't remember let alone the month. I don't remember the year. I should, but I don't. But it was definitely before here. It was when Obama was president. I do remember that. So they first take on the name ISIS and they're in Syria, and there are maps you can look at. You can look at, search Google Maps to find maps of Syria during these histories, and you'll see the growth and the spread of ISIS. And then you'll see as they started to get pushed back and almost out, which resulted in 2019. Al-Baghdadi was bin Laden's replacement, and he's killed here. And we'll look at more of the dates in just a minute. He's killed here. Trump makes a peace treaty with the Taliban, and then you have 2021, the troop withdrawal. So just taking the dates, and this was all established fully by, or laid out by Elder Parminder. I don't remember if Elder Tess filled in all of these. So there may be different things that belong there than what I did put there, but I did line them up to compare them with what we're going to look at over here in a minute. So that's just a rough look at those two 10-year periods of 10-year Syrian war. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that so far?
Bin Laden died May 2nd, 2011.
Thank you. May 2nd, 2011. Perfect time. Right there when the Arab Spring kicks off, which is kind of interesting. I do have down here, there's these videos here. I didn't want to erase everything, start over, so I put the rest of them down here. Things that we've been looking at that have helped bring out some of this, to put this together, was Elder Tess, when she did cause and effect, and also understanding waymarks. If somebody wants to look those up, because I don't remember the dates and where, but I'm pretty sure they were 2020. So if you looked up cause and effect, you'll find it. And so those are what actually, it was understanding waymarks that talked about the every waymark having its own story and a cause and effect. So we looked at 1989, which Elder Tess talked about how there were many different dates, many different prophetic events that occurred, but there's one story that will give you time in a waymark. So while you have I don't have behind me the 144,000, you remember you're going to have a thread that you'll be able to thread an entire story through the whole line. But she said each waymark also has its own story, and that story will give you time. So in the 1989 waymark, you have September 11th, the fall of the crack in the wall in Hungary, and then November 9, 1989, you have the collapse of the wall. So you had a story that is depicting the King of the South, the message of the King of the South. 2001, you have the story of the East Wind, which again was September 11th, was the attack, and November 9 was the restraint on Islam. 2016, she marked out, which we could see based on what she says in there, we could say that the story was voting. She marks the general election, and then she marks as the cause, and she marks the electoral vote as the effect. So each waymark would have its own story. This being voting, and that's been brought up by Elder Parminder recently as well, that you have the mechanics. I think that's the right word. The mechanics of how voting works. How does it work? And I don't remember if we pointed this out on Wednesday, but the whole voting season, it begins with primary voting. All the primaries. I think they kick off in January and they go on until, I don't remember when they end. I don't know if Super Tuesday is the end of them, but then you go into, after all the primaries that are in various states, all the primaries are done. Then they have the Republican convention and a Democratic convention. Are they voting at the conventions?
Well, yes.
How are they voting? What are they doing at the convention?
Well, they have to pick who they're going to you know, which person they're going to choose to be
Well,
their
how did
candidate.
they choose that person? How did they choose that person? How do they know who to choose?
You tell me.
You have all the primaries, right?
Oh, by the
And doesn't the
weight.
primary go
Uh,
ahead, sorry.
is that what you mean by the weight of the results from the primaries? Then they choose.
Yeah, don't the primaries eliminate along the way a lot of the other contenders?
Yeah, I believe so.
So when you get to the convention, they're nominating their candidate based on the primaries. Is that correct to say?
I think it's clear. Yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense to me.
So they nominate their candidate based on the primaries. So now you have, if with both conventions happening, you then have the established candidate that will be in the general election. So all of the primaries lead up to the nominations of their candidate of the two party, or if there's going to be a third one. I don't think they do a third. They might do a third party, but there's no other convention, I don't believe. So the primaries lead up to the conventions where they nominate based on all those primaries. So if you remember when Elder Parmenter had voting before Sunday law and voting after Sunday law. So and then you have the maximum vote, which I believe then would be, I don't know if you can see it, but Sunday law would mirror, if that's the right way to say it, 2016, where it would be your general election and then your electoral vote. Okay, so that's Uriah Smith. I think we covered that now, and we'll go back over to here again. I want to actually, we'll touch down here because I know we didn't do this. Go ahead.
Down in the corner where you were mentioning the videos, the understanding the waymarks, is that Elder Parmenter?
No, these are both tests.
Oh, okay, thank you.
They're both tests. They're together in the same camp meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, cause and effect is, I don't, they're one right after the other. I just don't remember which numbers they are, but they're one right after the other in the same camp meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so then we'll go look at a little bit at this part right here. I think you can see it all. This is Millerite history. I don't have all the details on here. I would recommend watching, and a lot of this stuff, a lot of times I can listen to while I'm doing other things because I work. But this one I need to watch because he really is going through a lot of detail in this Millerite history, and he's showing how you take 1840 and 1844 and bring them together at 9/11. So I need to watch that one with sitting down with notepad to go through every step by step. But I got the gist of it because I wanted to make a few points that he makes. And he talks about threading the needle here with what we were talking about up there with Uriah Smith was right, that in this history, this is the needle, threading the needle of Islam through this history. And I say that because that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at threading the needle of the east wind on this line. And then as well, going through here. So we'll go through these ones step by step in just a minute. So we just went through a good part of this with Napoleon being the him and the two Islamic powers. The ending, coming to the end, will culminate in the end of the second woe. And I would point out another thing, and I don't have these studies. I don't know where these studies are at. I haven't ran across them yet, but I want to go back and look. Actually, one of them does do part of it, the transition one that I mentioned, transition of Rome from pagan to papal. Because then he goes on and brings it into our history. So you'll catch pieces of the history of the 1260, because we know that the 1260 is Revelation 9, where the first two woes are mentioned, and the third woe then would come quickly, it says, and we're living in the time of the third woe. So this is the Millerite history. You have the two Islamic powers fighting, and then you have the him, which is France. leading up to this Syrian war here. Same thing we have up here, the Syrian war, all the way through here, lining up with that, with the Syrian war 2011 to 2021. So 1979 to 89 was Afghanistan. And we know what was the 10-year history before 1798. Does anybody remember? What was going on in that history 10 years prior?
1979?
1798 would be 1780, 88 to 17.
Oh, the French Revolution.
Yeah, the French Revolution. So you have a 10-year history going on of the French Revolution, and then 79 to 89, you have the Soviet-Afghan War. Does anybody have any questions on that part? Or are we all following okay? Anybody? Everybody is okay so far? Gonna take that as a yes.
Just keeping up.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, we'll take that as a yes. Okay, so then we're going to jump to something else that so this is from Elder Parmenter down here, and pretty much this is from Elder Parmenter. Cause and effect, giving us the story of a waymark was Elder Tess. This is also Elder Tess here, laying out when she told us that yeah, she did this in Guadeloupe and probably Brazil before that, just before that, and probably later on after, but where she talked about the story of 1798, where we know that the papacy would receive a deadly wound and the deadly wound would be healed, which showed that there would be a deadly wound, a death, and then a resurrection. So that comes into our history at 1989, that compare and contrast in verse 40 part B, that the king of the south would receive a deadly wound, the king of the south would die, and then the king of the south would be resurrected.
Elaine, just a quick question. You might not know the answer, but where Elder Tess marks Panium to the Sunday law as the same as 1989 to 91, do you see any correlation yet where Elder Parmenter was pulling together 1840 and 41?
I just don't remember how they did it. I
Okay.
know that you bring them together. And so if I remember correctly, 1840 and 1844 were both at 9/11.
That's what I meant, 44. Yeah, they were both what?
Oh, I didn't even catch if you said it wrong. I
said it wrong. So they were, but he shows a way you bring them together.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's completely in that study, because that's one you really have to watch every step he's going through. And I was listening and not being able to watch. So I need to watch that when I have time to actually watch it too. So I don't know if that's exactly where he does that, but he's definitely laying out, and he goes through this, and I'm only going to tell you what I hear because I was doing things while I was listening, is that if you followed along with what he was doing, 1840 would come out in the beyond where we were at 2019. So I know that's where he's explaining how you get 1840 and 1844 to get. I think that's where he's explaining that. Because a lot,
That's really interesting.
Because a lot of this history, if you look at it, this history here is all going to take place before 9/11. Do you see what I'm saying? This history here is going to all take place, and even when you get all the way to 44, it's going to all be before 9/11. And we're going to expand out and look at it from a different view, if that makes sense. And so this one I would recommend watching, and it is it's number 3, and I don't remember the title. So if anybody found it, May 2019, go ahead and put it in the chat. Number 3, 4, and 5, or the whole playlist is good to watch. But it's number 3 that this one, he builds this line, and he has a lot of other stuff that he's talking about to build this line with. That'll help you better understand that. And then he goes into number
Could
4.
you
is
repeat that again? The playlist, the
It's May 2019
2019.
in
For, and
France.
this is Elder Parmenter or Elder
Tahiti,
Tess?
Tahiti. I think I said right. Tahiti. Elder Parmenter. Yes. Yes. Thank you for
Are
that.
those the ones that open with the Twin Towers and that music and the sword music?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I liked those. Been a while.
I'm looking and I see May. Did you say 2019?
Yes, Tahiti.
I'm in 2019. I'm looking at May and it's 2019, May to June. Oh no, May. Okay, I've got May 2019 Romania, and then
Nope.
I've got May to June 2019 Portugal.
Nope, Tahiti. Specifically Tahiti. I don't remember the dates. It's just May 2019, but it's Tahiti. You'll find them on the,
Okay, then it's got to be December. November to December 2019 Tahiti. Is that what that-
no, it is
Uh,
May.
we found it. It's Tahiti, May 19th through the 25th of 2019, and there's 10 videos.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
I don't
Uh,
I don't see that. Can you post that, Phil?
Hopefully somebody's going to put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Because that's a good one to go to this history and this as well. Here. So Susan, back to what I was trying to, or to everybody, because on this line here with what we had, remember we go to 1844, and that's all going to be pre 9/11 on our line. But when you look down here, he lines up this 10-year war with Syria taking you to 2021. And so you have to watch how he brings this together to be all at 9/11, because this is another history that goes underneath, and it's not going to this is beyond 9/11. So anyways, I don't know, I might have confused that. Hopefully you follow it and you catch the presentations and follow that. Okay, so let's go up to the two main lines that we now have, and we're going to take this from this concept here, that or this teaching from Elder Tess here, that the King of the South, Russia, would receive a deadly wound in 1989, and then a death. It would be the USSR. I think I said Russia. This would be the Soviet Union. And then come down into our history, or later on in the line, you have 2021. She marked as the deadly wound and the death of Russia. So you have the Soviet Union, and then you have Russia, because we saw that there was a deadly wound, a death, and then a resurrection. That's where Putin comes back and starts to rise into power. So and then you can cut. Then this would be cut, and what you do is bring this under here, 2021 and Sunday law. So this would be the Soviet Union, and this would be Russia. Okay. This was just something I caught out of, I think it was the number 3 or this is number 4 in Tahiti, 2019. When mistakes create disappointment, and then disappointment, when there's disappointment, people wind up leaving. And I'm remembering back where Elder Tess said, apologize, I'm not going to be able to tell you where she said this, but we brought it up a long time ago. She makes the statement about the message being a message of purity. The midnight cry message comes, and it's a message of purity. And then she specifies prophetic purity, not moral, not moral purity. So the importance of having the message right keeps us from disappointment and keeps us from leaving. Oh, I did write May number 4. Thank you. I did write that. Okay, so now we're going to go to the two main lines, taking this concept of here, 1989 to 2001. You have the deadly wound, the death. In 2001, you have the east wind come. And down here on our line, you have 2021, the deadly wound, Sunday law, the death. This comes straight from Elder Tess telling us that it would be, that Sunday law would be the death of the King of the South. Then you have the close of probation. So we'll go into some of these details in just a minute. We're going to back up now to see the 10-year war that goes on before here. So the Midnight Cry comes in and gives us the understanding of the King of the North and the King of the South, that we had a lot of things wrong. Gives us the message of the King of the North and the King of the South. But if you can thread this needle, we'll just go back to the east wind. I know I want to try to keep it to the east wind. So you can thread this needle of the east wind down here through the Millerite history. We can also thread this needle here, and that's why I brought up the two charts, because the two charts actually have the east wind on there. So when I'm looking at it, as I look at it today, I'm thinking, wow, how much we should have known, okay? Because the two charts already had them there. So there's this history where you can trace these factions in the Middle East that are fighting. And then you have the proxy war of the King of the North and the King of the South. And the proxy wars are fighting for spheres of influence in the Middle East. Why are they fighting for spheres of influence? Why do they want spheres of influence in the Middle East?
For control.
Control.
Oil, resources.
Yeah. Oil, resources, yeah. So there's a lot of history that goes back that you can trace all the way back into the Millerite history. We're going to pick it up here at 1979, but I will mention that prior to 1979, it's still the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union is working its way down. So Afghanistan is right there underneath Russia, if I remember right. And they're wanting to gain control in Afghanistan, have a footprint in Afghanistan. And so in this history, back in here, 50s, 60s, in there, they are working on, eventually they get a puppet leader there. So they start spreading communism. This is all during the Cold War. They're spreading communism there. And then you have within Afghanistan, those that are pro-communism and those that are not. And I don't know if I want to I don't want to say it wrong. They definitely had pro-Islamic and Sharia law type factions going on as well. So anyway, so they get a puppet government set up, and then eventually there becomes a fight. It's a fight within Afghanistan, but then the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in 1979, and then you have the 10-year Soviet-Afghan War ending in 1989. So in this history, in this 10-year history, you have the Mujahideen that are there fighting with the Sunni fundamentalists, I believe, the Sunni fundamentalists, and they are mainly supported, this is from Elder Tess as well, mainly supported by the United States and Saudi Arabia. But they are also others that are involved, China and Britain, that are also supporting the Mujahideen. And bin Laden, on record, it said that it's first recorded anyways, that he goes there in 1984. But I think he said, or it was said that he was there before. But anyways, in 1984 is the first record of him being there. You have a change of leadership. I mean, if you want to know that history, we're not going to go into it, but it'd be good to go look on Wikipedia and read on the Soviet-Afghan War, and you'll see the different factions you'll see leading up to with the puppet government they put in place and who the leader is in here. And then, but in 1985, you do have a change in leadership. That's when Gorbachev comes in, and Gorbachev is more about trying to talk to the people, and whereas the government before didn't talk and communicate with the people, they just did what they did. So, but I would encourage you to check out that page. It'll give you some of those details that are certainly escaping my mind right now. So you do have a change of leadership. Then in 1888, Al-Qaeda is formed, and Al-Qaeda means the base. And there was 15 of them, bin Laden, and then the 15 of them form Al-Qaeda, and called the base, or that's what it means, the base. And also, this is when they shift their focus Because who's the enemy of the east wind? Who's the enemies of the east wind?
Well, wouldn't it be
Everybody,
armies of Rome?
everybody will be again. Well,
Oh, yeah. Good
Yep.
job, Phil.
So you've got the king of the north and the king of the south that are you're in the Cold War back in here before 1989. This is all the Cold War era, and you've got the king of the north and the king of the south trying to get their footprint and their spheres of influence established in the Middle East, and the East Wind says we don't want either of you. So they fight the king of the south, the Soviet Union, and they win. They win being supported by the United States and Saudi Arabia. So now in 1988, they begin to shift their focus to the United States or the King of the North. And then in 1989, Gorbachev pulls the troops out of Afghanistan. And I did not know this in the past as well, but the Soviet-Afghan War was called Russia's Vietnam or the Soviet Union's Vietnam, but it was a war they should have never went into. When they did go into it, they expected to be there 6 months and be out of there, and they weren't. And they took a huge beating. The numbers are on that Wikipedia page. Took a huge beating, and so you've got these Arabs that are actually fighting them and being supplied weapons and such by the United States, Saudi Arabia, etc. Okay, so Gorbachev then, he sees what's coming, and I don't remember when he said it. Maybe somebody else knows that when he said it, but he makes the statement about the New World Order. And his view of the New World Order is he sees what's coming is that, okay, we've got these, Soviet Union and the United States, these two superpowers, and we're not going to be that anymore. And we also don't want the United States to be that either. So his New World Order statement was his view and vision of what he saw should be. And that would be that the United Nations would be over all the countries. So there would not be a boss over the UN. The UN would be over everyone else. So that was his view of the New World Order. And then you have this history here. You also have Reagan is prior to, and then the election is in 1988, I believe. And in 89, George Bush is inaugurated. And on September 11th, I might have had that for something else, but we're gonna, in case that was an error. September 11th of 1990, George Bush stands up and says no, or not no, but that this New World Order isn't going to be the way he said. This New World Order is going to be us over the UN, and we're going to be the police and the boss of the whole world. And that was September 11th, 1990. I had a thought that I was going to put in there and I can't remember what it was. So we see the wall in Afghanistan. I'm sorry, the wall in Berlin come down. You've got Hungary first. When you go back to the story of the Weimar, September 11th is the crack in the wall in Hungary, and November 9 is the fall of the Berlin Wall. So Gorbachev makes his New World Order statement, and then George Bush makes his. Maybe somebody also remembers when Iraq invaded Kuwait. If you could put it in the chat or shout it out, because we're going to back up just a little bit and talk about Saddam Hussein briefly. Because back in this history, in trying to get their foothold, the King of the North and the King of the South trying to get their footholds into the Middle East, it was the United States, and I'm pretty sure Bush Sr. was a part of it before he was president, but they actually got Saddam Hussein into power, expecting him to be a puppet for the United States, that it would be a sphere of influence for the United States. But what does Saddam Hussein do? Anybody remember? What does he do in this history? Anybody remember? He invades Kuwait, right?
Did it- Yeah,
Okay, Iraq, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. So he's growing, and this also from Elder Tess, he's now growing in military strength and economic strength in the oil industry. And George Bush's New World Order statement was, we're going to be the boss. But in order to be the boss, you also have to make sure nobody else grows as powerful as you. So the United States wants to keep in check any countries that might start growing in power, military strength, or economic strength. So Saddam Hussein, who was actually boosted into that spot with the help of the United States, is now invading Iraq, and he's getting too powerful. And in the era of George Bush Sr., when he makes his New World Order statement, he says this Iraq invading Kuwait is our first test as this military police. We've got to go in and we've got to take them out of there. So the United States wants to go in to Kuwait, and that's Desert Storm. But does anybody remember what bin Laden did? Bin Laden is just coming off of this fight here. They've defeated the Soviet Union. They've defeated the King of the South. What does bin Laden say about Kuwait? Anybody remember?
is this the one that when he wanted to go and protect Kuwait
Yes, yes. He goes to the Saudi government,
and Saudi
And-
says no?
and Saudi says, no, we want the United States. So the United States is the one that goes in there, and what's the result? How does bin Laden take that? They're already the Sunni fundamentalists are already got their eye on the King of the North, so they're not going to be happy with Saudi Arabia allowing the United States to come in there and fight that battle. So George Bush Sr. says that this is our first test. Desert Storm is our first test as the world's police, and this would be wanted the USA over the UN. And I also noted up here that this era in here was the time of the neocons. So we'll go into that a little bit more after we go through both lines, because there's a difference in the Republican Party here and here and how they're going to respond. So this was George Bush wanting to be the United States over everything and be the police. Bin Laden is angry. You come to 1991, you have the death of the King of the South. That's a complete collapse here. I don't remember if I said it there. It's the dissolution of the Soviet Union. 1995, the Taliban is formed. So in this history from 91 to 2001, you already saw back here at 1888, Al Qaeda, they're shifting their focus towards the King of the North. You see that he's angered. They're angered that the United States is going to go in and protect Kuwait when they can go protect Kuwait themselves. And then in 1995, the Taliban is formed, and you start to see this increase in East Wind strength. 1996 and 1998, bin Laden declares war on the United States. And then August 7th of 1988, they bomb 2 U.S. embassies in Africa simultaneously. So you see this increase leading up to now you get to 9/11, which we now know is the investigative judgment, which is October 22nd, 1844, correct? So this lines up with October 22nd, and it's the investigative judgment. It's the beginning of the third woe. And the third woe comes in 2 parts. First to hurt, and then to kill. So you have the East Wind, the third woe beginning, the East Wind, the investigative judgment beginning. 9/11 is when they strike, and then November 9. This would be the story. The story would be the story of the East Wind. They strike at 9/11, and then they are restrained. Mosul, I think, maybe. I asked Aaron about it. I think it's Mosul is where that battle was, where Elder Tess marked 11/9, November 9, as the east wind being restrained. So, who remembers the neocons? What do they? I do have it on the board, but what do they? What do they believe? Who are
Neocons are interventionists.
interventionists?
Yeah.
Okay, so so they so the neocons, they're the war. I think those are the ones they refer to as the war hawks too, is right. And I already went into Bush and how they want to, how we want to have they want to have the U.S. over the UN, be the police of everybody, not allow anybody to grow too powerful militarily or economically. So they're going to go in and stop it. They want to go in and intervene. And so the neocons are the interventionists that will intervene, and for right or for wrong, for the right reason or the wrong reasons, they're interventionists. And what's the result of their intervention? Islam or east wind is restrained. Do you see that?
Yes.
So
Yes.
Islam is restrained. Okay, I did put over here just a note because I don't know that it's ever, we've talked about it and I don't know that it's established, but we're just making note that it is here. In this history in between, October 7th is when the United States and British invade Afghanistan. So you've got 9/11, east wind strikes, and October 7th is when the US and British go into Afghanistan and Taliban declares themselves ready for jihad. And then they're restrained. And I think it was Mosul.
You know what I just learned about jihad? I did not know that it originally was a spiritual warfare, just like a striving with God, an internal warfare, not an armed conflict. But they're Islamic jurists. They have like these special jurists that interpret Islamic law. And back during the Crusades, like you have to go way back into the Papal Crusades when they wanted to take back Jerusalem. Is they began to arm themselves and they began to split their definition of jihad to an actual armed conflict. And it was interesting to me that it was actually spiritually initially, never an armed conflict, more like spiritual warfare, to perfect your character. That's how it began. And the other thing, there was one other thing, doggone it, it just left my brain. Pooh. It just left my brain. It was one other fact about that. Oh, well, maybe it'll come back. But I thought that was really interesting that developed also during the Crusades when they were fighting against uh, ancient Rome, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of history in here back pre-1798 in looking into the Ottoman Empire, because I think I want to say I think they got along with Christians, but Christians they used maybe somebody, the Jansensi, I can't remember how to say the name, but they were Christians that fought for Christian soldiers that fought with the Muslims, if I remember right. That was something we looked at a long time ago. But okay, so we've got the story of these three, King of the North, King of the South, and then a hymn in this history. But you can thread the east wind through this history, and this would be the period that is coming up to the culmination of the end of the second woe. We come up here and we see the third woe begins, and you have the 9/11 strike. The investigative judgment begins going back to October 22nd, 1844, giving us the investigative judgment. And it's the beginning of the third woe that comes in two parts, and the first part is to hurt. So now we're going to come down to this history here, 2011 to 2021. where you have the 10-year Syrian war. So you have a 10-year proxy war, Soviet-Afghan war. And there were, like Elder Tess said, there's many stories that you could tell at a waymark, but one story gives you time. So there were a lot of other things happening here. You've got the Iran Revolution here. The Shah of Iran is overthrown and it becomes strict Sharia law under the Ayatollah Khomeini. And then you have the Iran-Iraq war. This is the time where Saddam Hussein, I think he invaded Iraq. And then you have the Iran-Iraq war, if I remember right. I might have it wrong, somebody clear me up. But they're fighting because he sees what happened in Iran and he doesn't want it to happen to him. And because Iran is mostly Shia and Iraq is mostly Sunni, and they didn't want to see what was going on here happen in Iraq as well. They wanted to try to crush Iran from their progress, and rather than having them try to push into Iraq. So you've got the Iran-Iraq war going on in here. I know there's others. There's others, but anyways, but the main story here is the Soviet-Afghan war. So down here, the main story is the Syrian civil war, the 10-year proxy war. Starts with Arab Spring. And that's a whole nother story that I don't have the details to remember it in my mind. I just remember beginning at 2011, and there was I think it was some kids that wrote some graffiti, and they took him in and beat him. And that kicked off the revolution within Syria. I think that was, if anybody can correct me on that, but I think that's what started it. So then Elder Parmenter mentions as well in those Tahiti presentations, he leaves it to us to go look at 2013. So the few points that I did pull out of 2013, there's a battle in May and Raqqa that was a significant battle that you could look into. But also this is where in April they become established. Instead of just Islamic State, it's now the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, because ISIS is now moving in and spreading out throughout Syria and dominating and controlling, which we'll get there. So 2013 marks this, and I can't remember when. Well, bin Laden dies in 2011, somebody said. So I don't remember if Baghdadi was right. Al-Baghdadi was right after that, if he was the established leader right after that. But anyway, so you have now ruling Al-Qaeda is al-Baghdadi. He takes over for bin Laden. And then you've got these different factions going into Syria and all fighting. You've got the Kurds, and you've got the Syrian Defense Forces, I believe. And so it's this big proxy war. Again, you have the United States and the King of the South. And so who does the King of the South support? He supports Syria in this, and that would be along the line too of tracing the King of the South, because I know when he intervenes, he supplies with a lot of weapons and finances and stuff for the battle, and he's getting a bigger foothold here as well. Okay, so I did mark. I'll mention when it's something I put here because I don't know, but you do have I marked this one as Gorbachev and change of leadership, and this because it lined up perfectly. This was 6 years to Gorbachev and 6 years to Trump. He was elected in 2016, but he's inaugurated in 2017. So you do have a change of leadership in the United States here as well. So, and I don't know how significant that is, but there is a change of leadership, and it does affect what happens here. Obviously, the change in leadership affects what happens here as well. So Elder Tess marks the beginning of the Paleocons as 2009. I think I said 2007 the other night because I remember the Tea Party, but in going back through some of her studies, she actually marks it at 2009. So the Tea Party was the kickoff to that. And then you get to the Paleocons in 2009. So you do have this, and then you have 8 years of Obama, right? And then you have Trump. So coming down into, I got 2019 and 2020 there for a reason, but this would be 2019 to 2021 would be the 2 years that you see over here. For the 2 years. And in 2019, this is when al-Baghdadi is killed. And then the day after that, Trump declares, and if anybody read them, I did put the 2 articles that I found on it that I thought were pretty helpful. Trump declares ISIS defeated. And if you read the articles, does anybody want to comment on points that you might have seen in those articles about what that means when Trump declares ISIS defeated? Does anybody have anything they want to add to that? Well, anyways, he declares in February, end of February 2019, that ISIS is defeated, but many of the experts, Middle East experts, and even his own, what's left of any kind of cabinet he might have, or that had been in his cabinet, Bolton is one of them, and they're speaking and saying that it's wrong to declare ISIS defeated. And Trump then makes this peace treaty in 2019, this peace treaty with the Taliban. But the Taliban doesn't stop fighting, doesn't stop going in and moving in and into Afghanistan and trying to continue to fight within Afghanistan. And you'll find that if you look up on the Wikipedia pages, those as well, you'll see that they continued to fight and work on domination and control of Afghanistan. So he makes this peace treaty in 2019. And so when the fighting continues, and then a U.S., I don't know if it was a citizen or a soldier, was killed by the Taliban, Trump backs off of his, if anybody remembers that, he backs off of his peace treaty, but then he goes back in, and I think it's in 2020, where he goes back in and reestablishes the treaty and agrees to have half of the troops pulled out. And then just before Biden is inaugurated, Trump then says that the United States will pull out all of their troops by, I want to say, I don't remember if it said May of 2021 or maybe it was to August, because it's in August when Biden actually does it. So Biden is now president, and Biden goes ahead, likely not wanting to, pull out all the troops out of Afghanistan. And if you go in and look into some of that history, a lot of what I found was on, and I mentioned it last week, I think, is PBS page that had a timeline of Afghanistan. So you can do a Google search of PBS and Afghanistan timeline, and you'll see some of those dates, and you'll see some of the things that the Taliban was doing leading up in between this peace treaty and leading up to pulling out all the troops. It's like, wow, it looked pretty obvious just from me that doesn't know much, looks pretty obvious that this isn't going to go well. And I did not know that at the time, but I do know that Elder Tess did. When you go back and look at her presentations where she talks about these things, and then when it did actually happen, some of her comments basically suggest she understood what was happening, and plus what was going to happen to women. There are articles that you can read on the 20 years of history where the United States was there, because we know that begins up here when they go invade Afghanistan and becomes 20 years in Afghanistan, and you have people wanting us to get out of there. But what happened in Afghanistan in those 20 years? Does anybody remember?
People had their rights.
Their rights. And particularly the women. So women could now go to school. They could be educated. So 20 years goes by, and you have women in government, in politics, high positions. You have women, female doctors, female lawyers. You're filled with females in high positions. So they actually see this coming and are fearful because they know what's going to happen. The Taliban's going to take over and go back to the way it was, which is exactly what happened. So you've got this neocon here. Al-Baghdadi is killed. He makes a peace agreement with the Taliban, declares ISIS defeated, sets up for the pull out of American troops out of Afghanistan. And now you've got this period here, this, which is dispensation as we look at it, 2021 to Sunday law, and come just before the election, you have well, we'll go in a little bit more detail in this history because October 7, that's the only reason I marked that up here, because on October 7 is when Hamas invades Israel, attacks Israel. And that kicks off this great humanitarian crisis as well, and a slaughter of the Palestinians. And I believe it was Elder Parmenter was talking about we need to look at that battle through the prophetic lens, not through the individuals and the Palestinians being slaughtered the way that they are. We need to look at it as this proxy war that's taking place. So you have that, and now when it comes to this issue of the King of the South, where the King of the South receives the deadly wound, what's he doing during this time? He's going to, in this history, invade Ukraine again, draining his resources, draining his military strength. And now when it comes to what happens in Syria, just a couple weeks ago, the King of the South is unable to help his support Syria in that battle. So the King of the South is dead. So looking at this history here, you have the King of the South, which is the Soviet Union, receives a deadly wound, and then the complete collapse of the Soviet Union, the death. And what does Acts 27 tell us? What happens when the south wind blows? What happens after? The east wind follows, right? So you have the south wind blowing, and then the east wind comes. The east wind shifts its focus from the King of the South and turns its focus now to the King of the North. So you have in this history a restraint on Islam. You have a 10-year Syrian war with these factions, these different east wind factions fighting. You've got Trump declaring ISIS defeated and making a peace treaty with the Taliban. You've got the troops pulled out completely out of Afghanistan. Taliban takes over again. So you've got the Taliban up here. So I don't know if you're going to mark the Taliban here again, but this would have to involve what's going on with the east wind, just as you see up here. You see the east wind rising into power. So somewhere along the lines, the increase of whatever's going to happen I would believe, I think, and I might be wrong, but it's going to involve the east wind here. That's because you're going to see the east wind rise. And now you have, up here you had neocons in charge, leading up to the beginning of the third woe. Now you have paleocons. So what are the paleocons?
Well, they don't intervene, and that's what
Yeah.
also has they're isolationists.
Isolationists, yeah.
And so that's what allows Islam to be unrestrained more and more too.
Yeah, I see that too.
So you have Syria. What are they all doing with Syria? They're all fighting for who's going to control Syria, right?
That's right. Yep.
So Syria is, the way I've learned to understand it, I've been very slow with history and war and all of that, but with Syria is caught in a vacuum. And someone's going to go and fill that spot. So I don't know if you're going to have Taliban or Afghanistan, because you have Afghanistan here. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to have to do with the Middle East and the east wind.
What about Iran, Elaine?
Yeah, I don't understand
Because
them
I
enough.
mean, they've been weakened as well because of their
Yes.
proxy war they were holding
Yes.
with Hezbollah.
And Lebanon as well, I believe, is
Yeah,
also
Lebanon
weakened.
too. Yeah.
So Syria now has this vacuum, as I understand it, and who's going to fill it? So you have the paleocons, which are isolationists, and Trump. When this happened, when Syria collapsed, and al-Bashar, Assad left. Does anybody remember what Trump said? His comments on it.
He doesn't want to intervene.
He didn't want to intervene. He said we need to stay out of there. And all the leaders back here, and not the leaders, but the experts back here, when he declares ISIS defeated, those two articles that I posted were two that talk about that, that he's declaring ISIS defeated and let's get all the troops out of there. Syria is now left in a vacuum. He doesn't want anything to do with it. As a paleocon, as an isolationist. And Elder Test also brings up the far left. Because the far left is, if anybody can remember how to say it, not isolationist, or isolationist for different reasons. If anybody remembers those details, because I want to go back and review those Vespers classes again. Because there was an article in Politico. I'll get the title if I still have it open. Oh no, I don't have it open. Sorry. I'll try to find it again. But it came out in Politico today or yesterday, I can't remember. Actually, some of us are probably familiar with Elon Musk and Ramaswamy, however you say his name. Vivek.
Ramaswamy.
But Vivek, yeah, I
There's-
can never say his last name.
So there's-
Ramaswamy.
Swami. Yeah.
So there's a bit of a battle that seems to be ensuing when it comes to immigration and wanting. If I need to read into it more to better understand it, but it seems to be a battle that's taking place between immigrants of high skill and intelligence for like AI and things like that, and it seems to be differing from what Trump wants, and then there's all the talk of Elon Musk being the president and Trump being his vice president, or to that such.
I saw that too. What do you make of that?
I know yet, but I know
Okay.
it's got to have a
Yeah.
because she mentions how the left, the far left, connects with the far right. And I don't fully understand. I need to go back and refresh the details of that because I think that might have something to do with it. Because there is a battle when it comes to the immigration over that. And that just was starting to come out in the last couple of days. So I don't understand it enough, but I think it's something we probably need to look at. And
It's about the tech bros.
yes,
right?
yes,
It's-
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about tech. They
And
want
that
all
we
the
should-
smart ones over here
yeah,
for sure. Because they've got their plans already set, what they are going forward to do.
and I think it's a battle with the far right, not necessarily with Trump, but her name is Loomer, Laura Loomer. Does that name sound familiar? She
Yeah, I've heard it. I'm not sure
posted
what she's doing.
the criticism of Musk for wanting I hope I say this right, the pro tech immigrants to be allowed to be here. And she was calling him out for that. So I didn't read it enough to understand, but I know it's got to be significant to what's happening now when it comes to the far left and the far right. So something we need to probably look at. And as Elder Parmenter points out in one of these, I think it's in Tahiti, that we need to be watching the news. We need to be watching the news through the prophetic lens of the story that is thread through. And the story that is thread through, we know, is human rights, gender equality, human rights. But you also have the story of Islam that threads through. And we're looking at this story of Islam that threads through because we know that it's east wind that is the third woe that hurts at 9/11 and kills at the close of probation. So why is it who remembers why this executive judgment is at the close of probation? Why do we place that there?
Well, isn't it because of Daniel 12:1?
No, Daniel 12:1, as far as I know, doesn't give us the executive judgment.
Well, isn't that the pronouncement?
Yes, yes, but if you remember where Elder Parmenter talked about 9/11 being a harbinger for the close of probation
Yes.
in the law,
Yes.
why how did he define that to put it here, not at Sunday law? Because initially, wasn't that what Elder Jeff was taking? He was taking the east wind and putting it back here at the Sunday law. Why?
The destruction of Jerusalem was part of it, but I don't remember.
Because humanity sealed their destiny. Yes, I think that's one way of saying it, Sarah. Thank you, Susan. It's 9T, Testimonies, Volume 9, and the other one I can never remember, but where it talks about the Nashville and talks about the Twin Towers. And he brings both of those, if I have the passages correct, I know I had 9T correct. I'm pretty sure the other one is talking about Nashville, but it's talking about when, all these, you're seeing all these buildings that are being destroyed. And I don't remember how it says it in 9T, but he goes through and defines it as there's no more mercy. And when is it that there's no more mercy?
Well, that's also Daniel 12:1 when they seal their fate, because that's
Yes.
when Christ stands up and pronounces the judgment on all
Yes.
humanity.
Yes, that gives us that part of it, but it doesn't give us the east wind, as far as I know.
Oh.
And the third woe. It doesn't give us the third woe. So those passages, the one in 9T, and then the other one where it also talks about Nashville, he brings those stories together and looks at them thoroughly to see that those buildings and what is being said in that dialogue is talking about when there's a time when God forbears forgiveness, and then there's a time when there's no more mercy. And in those passages, it tells us that when there's time where there's no more mercy. So it doesn't happen until here when there's no more mercy. Because back here, even though we see shipwreck here, is there still mercy?
Yes.
So if you mark this as 34 AD, which was not the destruction of Jerusalem, that was 70 AD.
Stoning of Stephen.
Stoning of Stephen. It was the end of the Israel as a nation. Shipwreck, I would say, for Israel, if you're going to put it that way. Sunday law for Israel. It's the end of them as an institution. But individually, there was still mercy until 70 AD. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, I see that. What's that? You don't have a page on 9T, do you?
That's the very beginning. It starts in the very beginning. It's page 11, and then you read on through. I don't remember how many pages.
I think it's on it's about the page 12 when it starts in that, but it is beginning on 11.
Yeah.
Okay,
19,
thank you.
Yeah. And I think you could put in the search Nashville, and I don't think there's a lot of hits for Nashville, if I remember right. And you might be able to find the other passage that talks about it and read them. And I don't remember if anybody remembers the titles of the presentations where he went through that. So if anybody has them, feel free to
Another
share.
thing to find.
Feel
Thank
free
you.
to share. Yeah. Because if you need, because you know what, like mentioned earlier, that like math, you don't go from addition and subtraction all the way to calculus, just jump over all those steps. So if you're unfamiliar with it, it would be very valuable to go back to those presentations and look at how he worked that through to show it. Because to me, it's that process of the journey of each of these teachings that builds us on that solid foundation. Because
It's a series of events.
Yeah. So like what I'm going through here is put together from what he and Elder Tess put together as a solid foundation. So to go back and do the math and get the concepts worked through is going to build that foundation underneath you to keep you from being shaken. And we know we're in a shaking. We've already heard that. We heard it before Sunday law that we were going to be in a shaking. And we know that we're in a shaking. So if you want that firm foundation, go back and watch those presentations that walk you through that establish the east wind, that 9/11 is a harbinger for the close of probation. So, yeah, I did put here, Trump said stay out of the Middle East. He's an isolationist. So where does this leave the United States?
An open target.
An open target. Thank you. I'm glad you. I didn't know if I was asking the question right. Definitely, you're in an open target. And then we do know that this is actually the four winds are let loose, and I'm not real versed on the four winds, but you've got basically hot war from I think NATO is mentioned. All this fighting is going to go on, and it'll be from all the four corners. But the east wind definitely they want to get rid of the United States. So that's all I have on this.
That was really excellent, Elaine. I could never have mastered that, but I could follow you, and I really appreciated it.
I would recommend going back to all those studies, because if we don't want to be part of the ones that are shaken out, then we definitely want to go back and strengthen the foundation that's under us so that we cannot be moved. And but yeah, I don't know if anybody has any comments, because I'm done, and I don't know if you want to close early, but I'm done all I can with this so far.
I just have a comment, Elaine. Thank you so much, as Susan said, for going through this. And yeah, I take notes and then I go back and I need to find some of these studies that you mentioned for sure. I was thinking the very last year with Trump with his immigration plan, we know that Islam attacked us at 9/11, using planes. Of course, people that, the terrorists that came in to the USA. So they're concentrating on the USA only and not paying attention to what's really going on, unless there's, does he have a secret service when he's inaugurated? I mean, he's certainly going to be, what's he doing with foreign intelligence and all of this?
Well,
that even would prevent some of that. I mean, we know it's going to happen, but
why we do need to understand foreign policy. He's going to be allowed to do what he's going to do in this.
Yeah.
He's going to be allowed. You made me think of a point that I did forget to mention, that yes, because Elder Parmenter also pointed out that though we know the story is gender, right, and human rights through the whole thing, what did he say about Trump's presidency? Anybody remember? What was the issue of Trump's presidency?
The economy and immigration.
Economy and immigration.
Yes, exactly.
What is he wanting to do? He's wanting to kick out all the immigrants. And what did he do in 2016? 2016, he put a ban on Muslims coming into the United States. So I remember we started looking back, this is a few years ago, looking back at, I think it was when Hamas attacked Israel. I wanted to look at what brings the might bring the Sunnis and the Shias together. So I was kind of looking into that history, and that's where I came across, because Elder Tess had already mentioned 96 and 98. I think I found that later in a review, but when we were looking back at it, he declares war here in 96 and 98. And then you have the bombings that take place on U.S. embassies outside the United States, right? Outside the United States. And then you have the strike on the Twin Towers. Economic. Don't know if I'm saying anything about what that means here, but definitely economic here. And so here, if he put the ban on Muslims entering back here right off the bat when he first became president, and now immigration is what he's attacking, and we're going to get them all out of there. he's going to, I mean, he's said that he's going to call martial law and get the military involved to get the immigrants out of here. So if you're a Muslim here in the United States, you might be living a peaceful life, but now you're watching this happen. How are you going to feel?
Yeah, pretty angry.
He also, he's going to have a hard time with the immigration because um, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy is now calling for more H-1B visas.
Yes, yes, that's what we were just talking about earlier. Yes.
Yeah, so he, and these
And
are,
that's a fight that's going on.
yes, because their corporations want to hire these people because for one, it's cheaper labor, cheaper, cheaper to hire these people coming from different countries, and then they're more vulnerable. And so some people are saying, well, why don't you just hire the one, Americans, So, Donald Trump is going to get himself into a big pickle because a lot of these big corporations, tech corporations, do hire these HB1 visa people that come from like India or different countries. And because they consider them just more technologically advanced as far as knowledge and all that. And they look at Americans, and I mean they like Vivek and Elon Musk, they look at Americans as not very sophisticated when it comes to engineers, and they just don't think America has many wise people.
Now,
Go ahead.
there's one other little thing. It's going to cost ICE 3 to 4 times the amount of money what is costing the government now to put his little project into place. Lots of money. That's why he's crying about the debt ceiling. He didn't get that. He'll have to wait and put it in himself in his turn. 3 to 4 times. Ooh, a
And
lot.
it's
Absolutely, Renee.
his
Thank
two
you.
buddies, his two buddies,
Right.
Elon and Vivek, they want to go reduce the debt by
Yeah.
what, 2 trillion?
What they are wanting is absolutely impossibility. There's just no way. I mean, it's
Well,
just
we can say that, but look what he did with Twitter. To me, that's an example of what he's capable of. He didn't care. He shut Twitter down, took Twitter down to like hardly any employees and
Yeah.
rebuilt it. And he didn't care what damage it did.
They don't care. They don't care when people lose their jobs and everybody gets, deported, and they pick and choose, and then they work you to like a slave. They don't care because it's all about the profits. It's all about the money. Everything, all of this, empires have fallen not because of culture or religion. It's because of economics. It's always been that way. And I was reading this article about Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has made bankruptcy part of his modus operandi. In other words, like a lot of people think, oh, bankruptcies are horrible, and they're just absolutely horrible, even though his corporations, there's no other corporation that has had as much bankruptcies as Donald Trump, and there's a reason for that. He doesn't see that as a bad thing. And the reason why, in fact, he has used bankruptcies
Yes.
to build his wealth. That's how he builds wealth. His
And
wealth.
what happens when he does declare bankruptcy, like the Taj Mahal, if anybody remembers that?
Well, everybody, nobody gets paid. People go broke.
That's it.
You lose millions of dollars.
They destroyed a lot of lives.
A lot of lives are hurt. However, there's one life that is enriched.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Because when people go and say, oh, they criticize him of having the bankruptcies, he looks at it as he's smarter than everybody else.
You put that with Elon Musk and what he did to Twitter.
Yeah,
and
it's
you
smart.
can imagine what this is going to look like.
Oh my.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, you can just
What we're
envision
looking at.
that.
So what they're going to do, this is because now they've found out, because it's really all about them. They found out a strategy that enriches themselves. And so they don't care what happens to the American people. These are not people who care about Americans or our country.
People.
Donald Trump is the farthest thing. He cares about himself. He has proven that throughout his entire life. It came from his dad, really, but he's kind of perfected that mentality to the point where he's going to take our country and use it for his wealth, for his enrichment, as well as his families and his family members. And our country will just dissipate into, like, we'll be just a collapsed nation.
There's this little scripture that says, what does it say? Weep and howl, ye rich man.
Yeah, James chapter 5.
That's coming. That is coming.
Ezekiel talks about it too, and I don't remember where, but Ezekiel talks about it where they're gonna cry in the streets because their gold and silver is worthless to them. But that's like, I think, after here.
Yes.
But here it's gonna hurt all of us. Because
Everybody.
you look at his bankruptcies, and then you look at what Elon did to Twitter, and the people that wanted a king. They wanted him as their king because he knows how to run business. And they're, you have the ones that say that, the United States isn't to be run like a business. He wants to run it like a business. And that's how he ran businesses.
And this is
Destroying all the people underneath him.
And this is the difference between a business and a government. Two different, totally different situations. A business is always focused on profits. A government does not focus on profits. It focuses on policies, okay, and people. If you take a government and now you run it like a business for profit, that will be the last thing you ever do. That'll be the end of your government. And so that's the problem with everybody, even our neighbor, oh, but he, ran wonderful businesses. I'm thinking, these are people who don't read. Of course, we know people don't do the studies. They don't read articles. They don't research. And so they just think he's this wonderful businessman. No, he's not. He's a con artist of the most. That's one thing he's mastered. He is the best con artist.
Now, they kept it kind of quiet, but during Obama's term of total of 8 years, Trump spent in 4 years double what Obama spent in his 8 years, $8.8 trillion.
Yes, and
blew the money.
And most of that money that he spent was before COVID.
Yes.
So he was already way over before COVID. But the thing is, the propaganda, the right-wing propaganda is so, you got to take your hats off to them, because they have just blown away the left. The left doesn't have anything they can't even fight against it. And
we're going to see this economic hardship that's going to hit all of us.
Everybody, yeah, except if you're rich.
We're going to see his policies, his isolationists, America first, and Muslim bans, etc., and the deportation. And you can see the rise of the angry horse.
Yes, and except
you can see the United States unprotected.
Except the thing is, they say America first, but yet Donald Trump does business all over the world. He doesn't care about America. But yet for Americans and for his country, or how he feels, he wants to isolate it. He wants to control everybody. It's just like if you're in an abusive relationship, the person who is abusing you wants to have control over everything, but that they can go and do other things that you can't do. Donald Trump does businesses with people all over the world. He's not an isolationist when it comes to him. There's
a whole other side of that we need to look at. That was, I think, in the Politico article. I'll try to find the article there's a couple that I was reading that I need to read again because it was too complex to get it in a speed read. But we know that he's talking about Panama, right? And then his tariffs and such. But he wants to take back Panama. Why does he? And from what I was understanding in the article, because China uses Panama to come through.
Well, he wants.
So there's that to look at as well. And that article talked about the isolationist side of him, and then also what he does elsewhere. So I'll try to find that article and post it. I'm pretty sure it's Politico.
he also wants to buy Greenland, and
Yeah.
Greenland said that we're not even, it's not even for sale. You know,
But Greenland has, if I understand correctly, resources for like whatever it is they use for the batteries. Is that right?
rich in natural resources, yes.
Yeah. So
One of his problems on the Panama Canal, he's very upset with the new president of Mexico.
yeah, she stood up to him.
Has let China put electric car plants into Mexico. They have a rail system just above the Panama Canal that they're unloading cargo like we do here in Los Angeles and railroad it all the way across to New York. She's doing that on the little peninsula there in Mexico. And he's getting all upset. The trouble is Panama, that salt water to salt water was being refilled the ducts there to let the ships come through by a lake. The lake has gone dry, so it's starting to be a problem. And they can't fill the ducts to keep the ships moving across and back and forth. So that's why he's trying to get in that. But he's very upset with Mexico, very upset. She doesn't play his game. She doesn't take nothing from him.
Yeah.
It's going to be. We do need to be watching the news with the story that threads through, and the story is we know human rights, gender equality. We know that it's the story of the East Wind as well. We know that you're going to see economic suffering, and then the story of immigration as well. So watching the angry horse rise, the United States now is I didn't put it up here, but where you have where did I put it? Oh, here. So you're going to have this is the seventh kingdom, we know, right? And the seventh kingdom is, oh, I hope I have this right then. It's going to be the USA over the UN. Yeah, that's right. What they started here, and he was they were the neocons that wanted that, but that's what they want. This is how we are. Well, we'll be here as well. USA over UN, if I understand that correctly. But he also says he doesn't want to be the police. So there's that to look at. He doesn't want to be the police of the, I think Elder Parmenter mentions that in one of these studies, that of not wanting to be the police. No, maybe it wasn't. I don't remember if it was Elder Parmenter, but not wanting to be the police of the world, the isolationist side of him. But he does, there's other things that are going on. So we definitely have to know the prophetic story.
Yeah, but what he says is not, see, Donald Trump has a different mindset. He doesn't want to be a police of the world the way we have been for all these generations. He doesn't want to do that. But he does want to be a dictator of the world. So that's a totally his mindset is completely different. He doesn't want to do what we've been doing all, for these, America has been trying to, export democracy all over. He doesn't want to do that. He sees nothing good in that. But to be a dictator of the world, oh yeah, he definitely would like to do that.
Yeah, I just posted one article I did leave open. I meant to leave the other one open, but this one talks about the new Gladiator movie. If anybody, not that we're watching, but the new Gladiator movie, and it compares where we're at today to Rome as well. So I thought it was kind of interesting to look at. But that's all I have. If I got weird things coming up on my computer. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, good. Okay, because I've got something that popped up on my screen and it won't go away.
I just added a couple articles. One was the one I was talking about where Donald Trump actually thinks his bankruptcies were good and how he has his own methodology of
I
bankruptcy.
heard him say that.
Right. And then another one was how about his bankruptcies and what they did, to the casinos and what they did to people and all that. So it's just a good idea. It's interesting to see how Donald Trump thinks because he doesn't think the way we do. So like when he says he doesn't want to be the police, that's not exactly how we're thinking. He's thinking differently. He doesn't
Yeah.
want to be the police of good, but he would definitely like to be the dictator and the police of evil.
Yeah.
He would sign up for that right away.
He already is.
Yeah, he already has.
Amen.
Mayor, what are you talking
He's also with not he doesn't I'm not trying to think how I thought it through earlier. It's not that he wants to be the boss of everybody, it's America first, but I think it's his behavior and what other leaders have seen him capable of, that he doesn't have to do much to where they're cowing down to him. Not all of them, obviously Mexico, but they're bowing down to him.
It
Because
also,
they've seen what he's done, and nobody wants to get in his path. Just like in the United States, nobody even Jeff Bezos. I think we talked about Jeff Bezos. He actually cowed down to Trump before the election.
Yeah.
And you saw after the election, immediately after the election, you have other leaders that are cowing down to other world leaders. So they're all seeing what Trump is capable of, and how did he put it? Everyone wants to be my friend. I think that's what he said. They don't want to be his friend.
no,
They don't want to be his enemy.
right.
I
But
think
you
there's
know,
a difference.
Donald Trump is like he was abused by his father, and he's so this abused child that's always tried to get his father's favor and approval. And I don't think that he ever got over that. And so now his father is gone. So, but he still has the desire to have approval from everybody. And that's everything to him. And
That's
so
it's good to remember as we observe all these things, that we were all born on this planet as babies in whatever environment that shaped us.
right.
Yep.
It is. And so I understand how he's, I understand what he's gone through. And some people, but not everybody goes down the road of most people do not become Donald Trumps. Most
Well,
people, they work out their difficulties. They may never get over the abuse, but and maybe they will perpetuate the abuse, to other people or maybe other generations after them. But for the most part, I think a lot of people, there are choices when you're being abused. You have about 3 choices. You can abuse others because you were abused. You can choose not to abuse others because you know how it feels. And then you can be apathetic and just not do anything. And not learn anything from it. And so Donald Trump chose to abuse others.
And he should not be allowed to be in office as high as he is, the president of the United States, and have those abusive tendencies. He has more criminal records filed against him, and they got those all delayed.
But
That's why he's a dictator.
But most dictators are. I mean, I just got through reading Strongmen from Ruth Ben-Ghiat, and she only chose maybe a little handful of dictators, and they all came from abusive family. They were all abused as children. Those are the ones that are charismatic, and the people want them to be. That's why they're called strongmen. They've always been that way. Not all, but I mean, because like Joe Biden's not that way. But the people who have wreaked the most havoc on earth and throughout history have been abused children.
It is a sad world and all the deception that they're under, because what Renee said, that he shouldn't be allowed to be there, but he was voted by a democracy into that position. That's what the people under the deceptions that they are, which can all go back to as well when you go back to fast brain, slow brain, and how people process information and how people want what feels good or what's immediately in front of them to be good instead of looking at the long term. So many things factor into what, and social media and all that, the internet and then social media factor into what, where we're at today, to why the people of the United States voted to put this king in place. So,
I know.
Assertive brainwashing.
yeah. So, but
There's,
you know, we all had the opportunity to pick up and try and I know that's one of the things they were against some of the universities for, because they believe the universities, liberal universities, were brainwashing people. Liberal universities were training people to think on their own, to weigh the evidence and think and seek out facts. So
there's this, if any of you want to watch a documentary on, if you have Amazon Prime, it's called The Brainwashing of My Dad. And it's about a woman who does, she does a documentary, and she talks about the phenomenon of her father and his progression into right wing. He used to be liberal, and then now he's like this right wing crazy person. And then like she goes, it's very good, and it just looks at the whole history of what happened to not just her father, but to people who have gone that way. And there is a happy ending at the end, but it was a very, very good documentary called The Brainwashing of My Dad. If you have Amazon Prime, it's free.
thank you for that. Donna, would you like to close us in prayer?
Sure. Renee, why
Yeah.
don't you close in prayer? I'm going to have Renee.
Renee, sure.
Our gracious God in heaven, we want to humbly thank you so much for all this information that we are learning. And we pray that you keep our minds open to the guidance of the Holy Spirit and the updates of our elders that are trying to put everything in its right place and position. We thank you for this blessed Sabbath day. And we ask that you keep us on a learning mode through your Sabbath day. We're going to ask this in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much.